It's really lovely to have you join us, Aidy, and appreciate this is sort of the third time round we've been trying to do this, and hopefully everyone can get something out of this. As I said previously, if you were on the other line, it's going to be a chat. Me and Aidy are going to have a bit of a chat. I've got some questions that I'm going to ask, but if you've got any questions throughout it, please feel free to throw them into the chat, and I'll keep an eye on that. And also, or even if you would like to ask it yourself, throw your hand up. Let's there's quite a sort of a nice number at the moment, so if people want to do that, we can do that. But ideally, put them in the chat, and then we can kind of fit them in as we go along. How does that work for you, Aidy?
That's perfect. And yeah, because we got this set up where people can actually turn their cameras on and ask a question via audio or whatnot, then that's always welcome too.
Brilliant. So let's get started. So I think hopefully some people will have know who you are, Aidy. And those that don't will have seen the blurb that's come out, that you are a TV presenter and that you have been navigating that with Tourette's from a young age, and then recently with a new diagnosis of ADHD. But just for those that don't know maybe you or maybe much about your career, would you be able to give like a little brief overview of like who you are, what your career has been, and sort of what your neurotypes are?
Absolutely. So I guess I'm like a stereotypical wonderful neurodivergent person who doesn't just do one thing. They do so many different things, to the point where people are kind of asking like, how are you able to do so much? You know, don't get me wrong, there's always the challenges and the pitfalls, but there's also the remarkable side, and we'll get onto that throughout the chat. But what do I do? So I work across journalism, I work across broadcast, I work across presenting, I work across advocacy. So on the journalism front, that was something I was always fascinated by when I was younger. I remember when I was like 13 years old, and I was a radio presenter on this online radio thing for kids, and I loved the creative side of it. So I think that presenting element kind of grew throughout my life, across journalism, across the radio things that I would do, across the TV presenting, but also speaking on stage. Again, like when I was a little boy, I was a child actor, and that was before my tics emerged from my Tourette's, and I was having the time of my life at that point. And again, I know that as we progress through the questions, we'll kind of talk about what happened to that side of my life. But I'd also say that, again, much like individuals who are neurodivergent, 40% of people with dyslexia are entrepreneurs. If you have ADHD, you're 500 times more likely to become an entrepreneur and set up your own business. And so I consider myself very much an entrepreneur, always trying to think outside the box, because that's essentially what we've been forced to do. We don't fit that status quo. You know, if we have the whole presentation system or those forms you have to fill in for jobs, for assessments and whatever, we already know at the very beginning of that process that we're going to fail that. So we've always had to think outside the box. I've never applied for a single job in my life. I've only ever emailed CEOs, managing directors and general managers and told them directly, this is why I want to work for you. And that's filtered through. So rather than it being just give this person the assessment to fill in from the ground up, it turned into head of HR, I want you to talk to this person because there's something about them and I don't know how they're going to fit in here, but is there something or a job or a role or something where we can fit them in? So I've always been a risk taker and a chancer on top of all of that as well, because doors don't open as easily for us. And I think that especially with having Tourette's, which is a lot more noticeable at times. I mean, when I'm switched on and I'm doing my thing, my tics are nowhere near as kind of prevalent. You can't see them as much because I'm doing my thing. But when I'm stressed, they certainly do come out. And you know, I don't know how on top of the headlines people are this week, but we've just like 2 days ago, there was a 13-year-old boy who was traveling with an airline who's refused access to the plane because he has coprolalia being the swearing element within Tourette syndrome that around 10% of people have. And it's all based on essentially inappropriate thoughts in that moment, so intrusive thoughts which come out as words. So it's not something that someone actively believes in or is thinking because they have values with that word, but it's just the most inappropriate thing in that moment. So there he is in the airport, having already sent a doctor's letter to the airline, wearing his hidden disabilities, you know, sunflower lanyard, and having let all the plane staff know, and he said the word bomb because that, you know, the most inappropriate thing you can do in that moment. And usually that wouldn't be an issue because everyone's aligned. Everyone knows this person has Tourette syndrome. They can't help it. But in this instance, he was kicked off the plane, and armed guards escorted him and his parents off the plane. Because I think in this instance, other passengers had complained saying they did not feel safe, whereas if it was just the airline. Tourette's has definitely been in the news this week for anyone who's spotted that story. And I've been chatting with the family, trying to figure out how they navigate this, and working with them on the press as well to kind of tell their story and raise some awareness. So it's, again, there you go, another role to add to that wonderful list of things that we do. So that's a very expanded answer for you there.
Yeah, no, and I think really, really interesting. There's lots of things that really resonated there, and I think it's great that you brought up what happened recently. I think it's really important that these things are raised, because I think sometimes some of those kind of stories can kind of fly under the radar, and people don't always hear them. And I think they're really important to kind of start those conversations. I also thought it was really interesting what you talked about, how you created your positions and how you think outside the box. And I know that I've certainly been in similar positions, and I've spoken to other neurodivergent people that, again, constantly don't feel like they fit into like some of those traditional job roles, but know that they can bring something to a company or an organization or an idea. So I think that's really inspiring. I think it probably resonate with quite a lot of people. You touched a little bit on about your Tourette's and sort of being a child actor before you started with the tics. So I was wondering if you could share with people like when you got diagnosed and how that happened with Tourette's, and then also your more recent kind of journey with ADHD as well.
Absolutely. So when I was a lot younger, from the age of about 5, I really got into acting, in a big way. And so I was at my acting school, and then I essentially got cast for a particular role of this TV series that was on ITV. And at that point, I got cast as this role called Joey. I was in a TV show commissioned by Sesame Street. It was on 3:20 p.m. every single day, having the time of my life. Absolutely loved it. Was super popular at school because I was the little TV presenter and all of this. Season 1, fantastic. Got out the door, went out. Season 2 was commissioned. Then midway through season 2, when I was about just before I hit the age of 7, I started developing tics. And at the time, it was kind of like different noises, and so vocal and motor. I don't know how much everyone knows about Tourette syndrome here, so I'll just do a quick 101. But it presents itself in the form of tics, which can be vocal or motor. Motor means a movement. So one of the ones I got right now is I roll my eyes quite a lot, shake my head somewhat, I click my neck, I twitch my abdomen, which gives me a lot of pain. But again, I'll talk about those bits later. And then vocal is a noise, so it could be a sniff, a whistle, a scream, a word, like any of these different things. When I was a kid, I would scream. I would have just a bellowing scream, just one single scream. I'd shout out the word whoop, just whoop, out of nowhere. I would have at times such debilitating tics as I kind of got more hormonal and into my puberty era, that there would be a tic that I'd have where I'd throw my neck back so hard I'd give myself whiplash, or OCD manifesting with Tourette's as well. I'd walk down the street and I'd have to jump in the air, and if my feet didn't touch my bum when I jumped at the exact same time, I'd have to do it again and again and again until it felt right, and then I could keep walking. And so these are just some instances of tics, but there's so many out there. And when I was in DT class, I was banned from doing DT because I developed a tic where I would try and lick the soldering iron, and even though I wasn't going to lick the soldering iron, I'd do the movement with my tongue out, much like if anyone has seen the movie I Swear, where he walks by the lamppost every time and sticks his tongue out. It was a similar thing for me in that it was all based on the whole inappropriate, intrusive element of it. So suffice to say, as soon as those tics started to emerge when I was about 6.5, overnight I was just kicked off the show, gone, done. Acting school dropped me, agent dropped me, representation, all of that just out the door. And it took about 2.5 to 3 years from that moment of knowing what on earth was going on, because Tourette's was not heard of back then. No one knew what it was. This was prior to Pete Bennett being on Big Brother. I think the only thing that had come out was the documentary with John Davidson, that again, only a small handful of people had seen that. And it was actually a teacher of mine who had seen that documentary, who at parents' evening said to my parents, I think that your son might have this. And after that, my mom went and searched online at the time because the internet had just come out. And there was a chap called Noel Faulkner, I believe was his name, down in London, who owned a club called Comedy Club. And he was someone with Tourette's who made a comedy skit out of having Tourette's. So he was living with what he had and being able to turn it into a living. And she was able to get a hold of him on the phone. And then within seconds of describing, what it was that we were going through, he said, you need to go to Great Ormond Street because that's where the only specialists are with Tourette's. Went down there, and within the space of 10 minutes, I was given a diagnosis because it was so clear that I had Tourette's based on how severe my tics were at that time. And so that was the Tourette's diagnosis, which, and again, throughout life, I diagnosed just around the age of 9.5, I'd say. But it took me until my mid-20s to even be able to openly talk about Tourette syndrome and then advocate for it, because again, it was such a taboo thing. And for anyone who watched Big Brother, there was kind of a double-edged sword at that point, because I finally felt like there was someone else in the world who was like me, because I was seeing the public-facing someone with Tourette's, and it was like, wow. But at the same time, I could see how mocked Pete was and how there was such a stigma around who he was, and people talking about that openly in public, like it just absolutely destroyed me. So to say the word Tourette's when I was younger would be the equivalent of saying the word Voldemort in Harry Potter, or literally getting a glass and smashing it on the floor so everyone would look at that glass, because that's how I felt when I heard those words. It was really debilitating. And yeah, you when you're going through something like that, the biggest thing, feeling like you don't belong, you end up really hating yourself. And there's a reason why around 47% of people with Tourette syndrome consider ending their lives. It's as high as that. Literally 47% of people with Tourette's, and out of those individuals, 28% every year actually attempt to kill themselves. That was the 2022 impact survey that we had from the Tourette Association of America, who I'm the global ambassador for, because even though they're America, they are global. And they were the harrowing stats, and we're bringing out our new stats shortly, and so we can only hope that those numbers have improved. So you fast forward throughout life of having the Tourette's diagnosis, and I'll kind of give the ins and outs of how I came to be where I am now later. But let's just say I was doing some documentaries, and I'd done a couple about Tourette syndrome for the BBC and for Virgin Radio, and I was doing one about ADHD because I thought, do you know what? I've got my Tourette's one that I've done for the community. Let me now look at helping other communities. And I think I interviewed all of about 3 people, and it literally was like I was talking to a mirror. And I couldn't believe it. And I thought, oh my goodness, I think this is me. And so I spoke to a good friend called Dr. Tony Lloyd, who was over at the ADHD Foundation that many of you will know. And I work with Dr. Tony as a patron for Tourette's, the ADHD Foundation and Neurodiversity Charity. And I spoke to him and I said, I feel like I might have ADHD. And he went, not a judgmental question at all. You've not got a diagnosis? And I went, no. And he went, okay, like we might want to get that looked into because in his mind, like talking to me and knowing me, he knew that I clearly had ADHD. And suffice to say, having gone through that process and done what was meant to be a documentary understanding the community, became a documentary understanding myself, talking to other people, but also pursuing that journey of a diagnosis. And, I only got that diagnosis 2.5 years ago, but all those things that I was constantly told were my Tourette's, which were not my Tourette's, but were in fact ADHD as part of a co-occurring condition, now finally made so much more sense. And, there's that wonderful quote, neurodivergence seldom travels alone. 80% of people who are neurodivergent, there's a very strong likelihood that they have another neurodivergent condition as well. And I think that's one of the big conversations that is yet to be had.
Absolutely. And I kind of leads me quite nicely onto my next question, because I think that has come up quite a lot, especially when we've been doing our neurodiversity symposiums. There's been a lot of discussion around, at first we were kind of very much silo looking at all the different neurotypes and having talks on those, but actually the conversation is, should we be doing that, or should we be looking at them as a package, as being neurodivergent, rather than individually looking at the neurotypes. And I think it obviously is really helpful to understand each of those elements. But when those elements come together, they can interact slightly differently. And obviously not everyone presents in the same way. So my question to you is, obviously, Tourette's is quite complicated and has it's a variety of ways it can present, like you've just mentioned, and ADHD is the same. And you've also already talked about the kind of overlaps with Tourette's and OCD as well. So how have you found navigating like those two different neurotypes, and do you think the conversation around co-occurrence is enough at the moment, and how should we kind of be thinking about it?
I think that we're literally only beginning to get into the conversation of co-occurrence. And one of the things that I feel very passionately about is whenever I hear someone say the word comorbidity or comorbid, I instantly retract. Like, if you think about back in the day, it was totally fine for someone to say the word retard or spastic. Right, there were two words that were used from the standpoint of a medical definition, and they were perfectly fine. Comorbidities and comorbid is exactly the same as where I look at those words. If you're talking to a little girl, little boy, or anyone who's just gotten a diagnosis, or anyone for that matter, and you're open to say, oh yeah, no, that's a comorbidity, that's comorbid. Like, the word morbid means death, disgusting, disease. And you're basically using this word around someone who is extremely fragile. What's that going to do to their mental health and making them think what they are? So I love how we very much are using these words, co-occurring conditions, with everything that we talk about. And I would urge anyone who's here now or listening, if you ever hear someone say comorbid or comorbidities, just gently and politely let them know that, do you know what? I recently heard another word for that, which was co-occurring. Doesn't that just sound so much nicer? And try and gently maneuver them into that vocabulary. And one of the things, if we're talking about co-occurring, not just co-occurring conditions when it comes to neurodivergence, but within a subset. So if I look at Tourette's, one of the things that is co-occurring with Tourette's and no one ever talks about is chronic pain. So I mentioned earlier that I've got a tic where I inhale air. So I just twitch my abdomen, inhale air, but that makes me incredibly bloated. And so then I've got this constant pain. When I'm stressed, I will do that tic without ever realizing or noticing. And then I'll think, God, why have I got such a bad stomach ache? And it's because I've subconsciously been doing that time and time and time again, to the point where I'm just in agony at the end of the day. And then you've got things like insomnia that come about when we can't sleep. And then you've got the push and pull between things like autism and ADHD, where one wants to do this and the other one wants to do this, or Tourette's and ADHD, where one wants to do this and the other one wants to do this. So there's a hell of a lot of difficulties within navigating that, and it's almost as if you're living two different lives. You're constantly in multiple directions. However, that said, at the same time, whilst on one hand it's really difficult, frustrating, irritating to live with, on the other hand, it ends up teaching you so much more. So in situations where others would get completely overwhelmed and really stressed out, I will be so calm and chill. But then the opposite will happen when other people will be super chill and calm. I will be super frustrated. So there's always kind of a push and pull. And I would say that, we talk about how neurodivergence is this spectrum and how no two people are the same, no two people are alike. And so, I think it's not just taking, for example, ADHD here and saying, okay, with ADHD, everyone's on a spectrum, somewhere's different. It's, here's ADHD thrown in with a little bit of autism, with a little bit of dyslexia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, whatever it is, that's the unique makeup of what it is. So if you think about a blank canvas and each of those neurodivergent traits is a color, and you just splat bits of paint on that canvas, no two canvas or canvae or Canva or whatever the word is are ever going to be the same. They're always going to be unique based on the makeup of what we have at those individual little things. And I think that, a lot of people will ask, oh, well, is it bad to have labels on things? No and yes and no. I think we're at a point in time whereby our community desperately needs the label in order to be able to progress and to be able to get that support to a point where we don't need those labels. And I think it's, look at the younger generations now when it comes to being gay or lesbian or bi or whatever, right? If you look at the younger generations now, they're just like, well, so-and-so is so-and-so, there's no label on it. But it has taken with older generations and will take a lot longer to have those labels in order to get that, awareness, protections, equal rights and all these things in place. And so So yeah, we're at the infancy of the conversation around co-occurring conditions right now, and I think it's beautiful, and I think there's a lot more to learn from ourselves and others, and just embrace every part of who we are, the good and the bad, because ultimately those traits shape us into who we are.
Yeah, well, perfectly said. And I think obviously you probably obviously as you've been involved with the ADHD Foundation, Amanda Kirby's theory, of the buckets. I love that as a way of explaining to people that you can have, if you, like you said, if you've got ADHD, you might have something that's really strong, but the next person doesn't have it as strong. And you've got, like, we've all got these sort of, it's almost like a brain sort of overview, isn't it? Sort of like, can we get like a brain map of all of our traits and our ups and downs and our difficulties? And that's the ideal. That's the long-term game, isn't it? That everyone has that, whether you're neurodivergent or neurotypical, we've all got strengths and weaknesses. That's the long term. But like you said, I think it's really interesting the way you said it's actually really important to have those conversations and that awareness and understanding what those neurotypes are with that label. I think does help kind of progress things forward. I think, yeah, really, really important. I want to come back a little bit to your work and some of your career and some of the things you said. I've got so many questions that I want to go off script, but I'm going to try and stick to the questions we agreed on. I just guess I think there'll be a lot of people that might be interested in sort of how you've kind of navigated it in a workplace. Obviously, we're based at the university. We're really trying to kind of challenge some of these stereotypes and kind of allow people to be able to work better in this environment. But you've obviously had quite a challenging career. You've mentioned about being dropped as a child actor, and I know that from some of the stuff that I've read when I was looking researching about this interview, you talked about saying that you would didn't feel like you could ever achieve your goal, that you were sort of told that you were never going to be on screen, etc. And then obviously you went off and have now done several, or you've done lots. So you've created your own TV series and all sorts. And when I was reading that, it really kind of hit a nerve with me, because I remember being at school. I'm dyslexic, and so I remember being at school and being told, you can't do that. I really wanted to be a scientist. I wanted to go and do a PhD, and I was kind of told, you're aiming too high. You're not going to be able to achieve that. You're going to, be a miracle if you even get to university. How did you navigate that, and how did what kind of helped drive you to kind of get past some of that, those kind of worries and those sort of like words that were said to you?
Yeah, I mean, when growing up, like when I was at school and the tics were there and pronounced, I remember that I was told I'd never go to university. It was like a laughable prospect to someone like me. In fact, the placement tutor who was in there at the time, or the university kind of tutor person who was meant to help us with our placements at university, literally laughed when I said I wanted to go to university. And I at one point I wanted to join the police force, but I was told I couldn't do that. And then I was told, you've got to be realistic. You'll never be able to drive, because if you twitch, then you could crash the car. So all these different things throughout life. Not just at school, but then into university years when I got to university, because I did my A levels, didn't get like the best grades, but because I had chosen a particular university where I really wanted to go there, and it was both my options, they'd seen that and they thought, you know what, right, he's what's the word? Given his passion towards this, he's dedicated towards our university, so come on in. So I did that course. And then during that, I had a placement year. Same thing in the placement department. I wanted at the time to go, Obama had just become president. I really wanted to work in America and kind of live that life. And the same thing, the placement department were thinking, you've got Tourette's, you've got to be realistic about this. Like, no one in America is going to pay for you to go on a visa when you've got a disability like Tourette's. And they're the things that you kind of hear. But I think for me, it's always been the injustice around it. And when someone tells me that I can't do something, I have this drive to kind of prove them wrong in the opposite direction that I can. And even if I can't do that specific thing, even if I'm unable to do whatever it was because it just didn't work out, not because I'm not good enough, but because the universe didn't have that particular plan for me, it's still set the right message in my mind that you should never stand down just because someone else says that you're not good enough. And there's been so many different moments like that throughout life. but you just have to kind of persevere and get around them. And every time someone says no, use that as a drive to say yes to yourself, to really be proud of who you are. And again, like when it comes to commissioners and when it comes to people who work in the TV world, there's no hope in hell of anyone with Tourette's ever getting a TV show, because if you tick or twitch, they're going to think immediately that you're going to have to reshoot the scene again and again and again. They're going to think that if you do tick, it needs to be edited out, and all these things incur much more of a cost. They don't think that people who are neurodivergent with something like Tourette's might be incredibly creative, incredibly spontaneous, be able to think on the spot, and doing live interviews when other people like just can't think in that kind of capacity. And all those things, even if there's ticks in there, make for great entertainment. And you know, at the time, it was lucky that I'd been working as a journalist for years, and I went to the different drinks brands, food brands, travel, tourism brands that I work with, and I said, I've got an idea. And I said, I'm going to make a TV show. This is how much it will cost to come into it. Are you interested? And because I never asked anything from these people, they said, you know what? Yeah, let's do it. And I said, it's a risk. It may take off, it may not. But they said, let's do it. Let's go for it. And then, yeah, Amazon picked it up. Series 1, they asked for a part 2, then Series 2, then Series 3. And that all came from, you know, I always say when commissioners are going to shut the door and, you know, the door just isn't going to be open for you, go out and buy the wood, buy the hammer, buy the nails, make your own door and walk through it. And that and work capacity is what we find. You know, the latest research that came out just in the drinks industry, and this is universal, but we know that the way in organizations in general, and I'm not talking about like the university, I mean in a general capacity out there with organizations, we know that these systems that are set up to hire people are not friendly to neurodivergent individuals. And even, I think it was like 68% of the people who are the hiring managers are aware that these situations are not fair to neurodivergent people. So what you are finding straight off the bat is that neurodivergents have less of a likelihood of being hired into an organization. And then beyond that, when we actually get through the door, this research that we've just done in the drinks industry showcased that 35% of neurodivergent people were about to leave their company because of the culture just not being friendly towards them. So not only are these individuals finding it so difficult to get through the door in the first place, when that small proportion of people who do get through the door, they then feel like they have to leave because they're forced out. And it's just ironic because a lot of people out there who are in the working world will very much be neurodivergent, but just not be aware of it. However, if they were aware of it, there's no hope in hell that they'd actually get the job they're in, which isn't that so ironic? I mean, some of the best people in the world, like if you look at, again, the drinks industry, like what's your mindset and brain capacity going to be if you are a chief winemaker or a master distiller? These people try thousands of liquids every single year to find the unique blend that makes their blend so you know, aside from everything else and unique in its own right. And in order to do that, you've got to have, you know, some form of autism to be able to really, on such a minute, precise level, in the same way that when I was living in Silicon Valley, any of my friends who were starting, you know, startups, I said, if you're software engineers, if they do not have autism, you are missing a trick, because these are some of the smartest people I've ever met in my life who, if that's their passion, you know, we can't generalize that to everyone, but if you have autism and go into the route of a software engineer, you are hundreds of times more productive than your counterpart who doesn't have autism. Because if that's your passion, that's your drive and that's how you think. And similar to ADHD is in the creative fields, you know, whether it be TV, radio, public speaking, all these things, there's just a correlation between those roles. And we need to get to a point whereby if we disclose that information or say that, it doesn't go against us, it actually works in our favor, because there's so much proof to kind of identify that neurodivergent minds are doing so well and are, quite frankly, the future.
Yeah, absolutely spot on. I think it's really interesting what you're saying about different neurotypes fitting into different roles, and I think you can see that quite clearly with certain roles, and like the different people sort of fit into it. But I think one of the conversations we don't necessarily always have as well is that in some roles where it's not very clear that where you're neurodivergent might be kind of beneficial, I think people again have that immediate moment where you're like, I'm not going to hire you because you won't be able to do the job, rather than being like, oh, actually, maybe they can't do this element of it, but they're going to excel at this bit. So let's actually capitalize on this unique skill that they're going to bring to this role. Because often, in a normal workplace, a job description is so varied and so wide, and not everything gets done all the time, but people kind of just assume that if you're neurodivergent, no, you can't do that. Actually not seeing that there are going to be things that you might not have even thought of that they can do. Which I think, really important message. So thank you for that. You've also talked a little bit about Tourette's. Reading the same question again. Moving on to the different question. You are currently the world's only global TV presenter with Tourette's. Is that correct?
Yes, as stands, sadly.
As stands. Though obviously it definitely feels like the conversation is changing, especially with some of the recent Netflix documentaries, etc. But what does it mean to you to have that kind of title at the moment? And have you felt a responsibility? You've talked really eloquently today. You do these, and you're obviously an advocate. But do you feel responsible for kind of sharing that message, and can it feel like a burden to be that person that has to always educate everyone about Tourette's or ADHD?
I mean, it's always a double-edged sword, because I think that, when you're in this position, you don't really have a choice. Like, it's your duty to help that next generation, or those people who are out there who don't have that voice, just because it's the right thing to do. I think that every single time I have those deep conversations or open up on live TV or radio or whatever it might be, and let people into the kind of parts of my life that most people would hide and would run away from, or keep at bay, even if they have overcome them, then you do end up feeling really vulnerable and sad after you've had that conversation, even though it's helped people. So there's always that kind of to and fro situation. But I mean, I'd always choose helping people over the opposite, just because I think it's the only way to help the world get into a better place. And I mean, I joined the Tourette Association about 3.5 years ago as their global ambassador, and then I joined the Hidden Disability Sunflower Lanyard program as their global ambassador. And those things have been so helpful in being able to educate people and kind of build and grow awareness. And just, if I'm on a plane, I travel regularly, like for my work as a TV presenter and journalist. And if I'm having a particularly stressful day where my tics are out a bit more, I'll wear my sunflower lanyard. And to see that, little boy or little girl who's walking down on the plane past you, and they're kind of, doing their thing, but then they look at you and they see that you're wearing a sunflower lanyard too. And then they kind of turn around, like they tap their parent on the shoulder, and they're like, look. And then you just have a little smile at the kid, a little wink and smile at the parent. And in that moment, you've taken a family who are probably absolutely bricking themselves about this journey that they're about to go on, because they have no idea how the kid's going to react, to thinking, oh my God, we're not alone. There's someone else here who just understands. And we might not have the same disability or neurodivergence, but we understand. We're a community. And I think that's the biggest word, community. And my main aim is to create and cultivate and grow this sense of community, because if we feel like a part of a community, we feel like we belong. If we feel like we belong, we champion ourselves and we champion all those around us, and we have pride in who we are. And that's one thing that for years and years and years we've always been made to feel like we don't have. We are made to feel like we are not worthy, like we don't belong, like we are different. And now those tables are turning, and instead of, I've got ADHD, I'm never going to be able to pass those exams, I'm always going to be a failure. It's, actually, if people with ADHD are 500% more likely to start their own businesses and become entrepreneurs, because I have that. I'm going to have these challenges along the way, of course, but the upsell of that is I can achieve this if I put my mind to it and find that progression path. And life is always going to be like this. Sometimes you're like, oh my God, like I hate my life, like what the hell? And other times you're like, God, I'm so happy. I wouldn't change who I was for the world, because I can see a light. And it's like seeing different colors that other people just can't see. That's what it's like to be us. There's the hardships, but there's also the beauty, which for anyone, life is like that too. There's always ups and downs. We just have a different version of that.
Absolutely, couldn't put it better. I really enjoyed the fact you said about the community. I think that a lot of people get that a lot of joy out of meeting other people that are neurodivergent or have similar neurotypes, and I really enjoy seeing people kind of like chat about it, really like their neurotypes openly, you know, sort of like, oh, my ADHD presents in like this, and someone will be like, oh yeah, me too, but oh, actually it's like this, you know, like everyone's kind of comparing, and it's really nice. And kind of, I think when it becomes something like that, something you're not scared of or afraid of or want to hide away, and it just becomes something that's just like, oh well, yeah, what's the big deal, like, yeah, I've got a bit of ADHD, whatever, like, let's just chat about it. It kind of breaks down those barriers, and I think people do connect. I wonder, I'm just going a bit off piste at the moment, just going back to your point earlier, we talked about sort of the importance of having those kind of labels to kind of understand, but do you think there's also a need for within the neurodivergent community to kind of also be more aware of other neurodivergence? I think sometimes, you know, there can be a bit of sort of side, oh well, we're in this camp and we're in this camp, and actually not really seeing each other and being accepting of each other sometimes. And have you come across that or experienced that before?
Yeah, I think like specifically, like my example would be Tourette's, because it's the most taboo of all the neurodivergence. It's by far the most taboo because of the coprolalia element. And if you look at all the stigmas that are out there, you know, the misconceptions, people's first association with Tourette's, even neurodivergent people, because if you have this neurodivergence, why would you think about looking at another one? You know, you're going to be thinking about this one. And so even within the neurodivergent community, people are thinking that Tourette syndrome is just something where people swear. And so what you find across the board, whenever you look at a lot of the kind of business disability forums, or basically whenever you've got neurodivergent conferences or situations taking place where it's about neurodivergence, the one condition that you're least likely to see in there is Tourette's, because it's the most taboo and people feel most awkward interacting with people with Tourette's because they don't want to take themselves out of their comfort zones. I think the same can be said in other areas as well, where there's stereotypes. You know, people might stereotype someone with autism and say, oh, well, they're really awkward and you can't have a conversation with them, which again is completely not true. If you have a certain conversation with someone based on a passion, they will just chew your ear off. They're not going to stop because they love it so much. And I think that with ADHD, you know, all these stereotypes that are out there that exist, I mean, thankfully now more people are being able to see that it is just prevalent in women as it is men, because before that was a huge thing where it was just like boys who would get a diagnosis, but everyone else was left out if they didn't exhibit the stereotypical, you know, traits. And so I think that's why now we're seeing a hell of a lot more late diagnosis, because it's kids who are getting diagnosed, but their parents are seeing themselves through their kids. And we talk about this explosion of diagnosis, and again, even in the neurodivergent community, some people are saying, oh, it's just everyone's getting it now though. And well, yeah, they're getting a diagnosis because they're aware of who they are, because they've never been privy to this information before. They've never seen that this exists. So belittling people because they're just trying to pursue a diagnosis, it's, you know, we shouldn't be doing that. I think there's a beautiful quote that I always sign off my social media videos with whenever I do them, and it's, we are only stronger together. And so we can only build as one if we come together as a unit, and again, community, in order to uplift one another. And we don't have to necessarily understand what one another is going through, because our neurodivergent traits are different. But if we can uphold that sense of belonging and love, then we're only going to thrive much faster, much quicker, and have a much more all-encompassing kind of comfort in the world, where we can exist in the world without feeling so apart and alone.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely inspiring, really important message. And do you think that extends to businesses? Like, what would you kind of want to kind of, if you had a call to workplaces, whatever the field, like, what can they be doing to kind of help sort of with that understanding, awareness, kind of providing sort of a better workspace for us?
Yeah, I love that question, because it's one that it gets asked a lot, but I always, when I listen to other people answering it, hear the kind of the same thing. And one of the things that companies always say straight away is, how can I support your neurodivergence? And it's that word support, which, great, thank you, support, fantastic. But I think we're looking at it from a completely different standpoint as to how we should be. It's, how can I help you soar how can I help you thrive? Not support in a general basis of, okay, well, how can you just kind of do the status quo? Like, what can I give you so that you know, do you need a bigger computer screen? Like, how can I give you the equipment so you can just do your job in the first place? Whereas what should be being asked is, right, what do you love about this role the most? And what can we do so that you can focus on that productivity bit so you can absolutely soar and thrive? Because at the end of the day, that means more revenue for us. That means more profits for us. That means more growth for us. Whereas the alternate is, oh, well, we just have to spend more money on the little disabled person so that they can, you know, get by with whatever they need. So I think the biggest thing is not looking at it as just support when it comes to organisations and people with disabilities and neurodivergence within them, but looking at what will allow that individual to be a catalyst of growth. Because that, once we get that conversation to the forefront, everyone will be running after neurodivergent people because they're utilising our skill sets and our passion points to help them thrive, not just as a tick box exercise because they'll get sued if they don't give us that special computer screen or like whatever it might be, you know. So that's my biggest thing. It's not support, but how to thrive.
Absolutely. I want to clap you there.
Yeah.
I feel like I've been trying to, I've been sort of feeling the same for such a long time, and it's just so nice to hear someone put it so eloquently. So absolutely thank you for that. We've got about 15 minutes-ish left, and I just wanted to remind people on the call, if you've got a question and you want to ask, or if there's anything that's really resonated, please put it in the chat or raise your hand and we can get to you. I've got a couple more questions, but I just wanted to encourage people if they have their own. So one thing I wanted to kind of go back to, we talked a bit about the co-occurrence and we talked about co-occurring neurotypes, but there's also a lot of research now that shows that there are other things that co-occur with neurodiversity. You've mentioned already, sometimes chronic pain or certain health conditions can be really linked, but also it suggests there's also a high prevalence of neurodiversity within the LGBTQIA plus community as well. You're obviously a proud member of both communities, and we've had some feedback from our symposiums that people would love to hear a little bit more about that and kind of navigating being in both those communities, and if there are any kind of unique barriers that comes with that, and what we can be doing more to support people that sort of sit within that space.
Love. What I'm going to do is, because something's just come into my mind that is related to this I want to talk about, then I'll go into the LGBT side of things, because again it's a topic that doesn't often get spoken about. So, you know, I sit here and talk about these kind of higher rates of people who are entrepreneurs, and all these individuals who are neurodivergent and go on to achieve remarkable things. The self-made millionaires, entrepreneurs, people who start their own businesses, all of this. And I think that at the same time, if you look at, 70% of all these entrepreneurs out there are thought to be neurodivergent, we also have 70% of all the people in prisons are thought to be neurodivergent. And there's this conversation of kind of an equal level here, and what differentiates someone being able to succeed versus the resources they have versus not being able to succeed and going to prison based on what they don't have. And I think we should always be mindful within our own community about supporting those people who might not have that, socio-economic background, who might not have as much money to be able to go to university or afford those books or go to that private school or whatever it might be. And we should always keep that in the back of our minds when we are championing our community, because that small little thing that you do for someone who is below that threshold to get them up to the threshold is life-changing in comparison to someone who might already be above it, who will still go on to do remarkable things. But I just think that as people who sit at the heart of this community, we should always have that in the back of our minds. And to say on the LGBT side, do you know what, it's really intriguing, and there's bits of kind of research which are beginning to emerge now that do state that there's a higher prevalence of neurodivergence within the LGBT plus community. And I guess right now we don't, like, is that genetic, like it's down to DNA, like, or could it be that individuals within both of these communities, they are so used to thinking outside of the box and being at one with their own feelings and being able to navigate the world in a different way, that they're just so much more at home with themselves. So it could be that there's people who aren't neurodivergent who are actually part of the LGBT community but haven't allowed themselves to figure it out yet, or haven't had the confidence to come out and say that because they've not already lived through these life experiences. Whereas the neurodivergent folks from such a young age have always had to think differently. They've found themselves in some ways a lot more and in some ways a lot less so. But is that what's allowing the neurodivergent community to say, oh, actually, I'm going to embrace my LGBT ties more so than a kind of hetero or or non-neurodivergent community. So it's a fascinating kind of space where more research is going to emerge. And I think the same can be said within the LGBT community as well, in that there can be a lot of internal hate within, the LGBT community. I've seen that in the same way that in the neurodivergence world, there's this kind of people saying, oh, well, no, the emphasis needs to be on us right now, not this or not that. And at the end of the day, we just need to come together and love one another,
Absolutely. Both really powerful points. And I think I'm really glad that you kind of came back to that first point, that we often do talk about that kind of all the successes that you can have being neurodivergent, but we don't talk about what happens on the other end of the scale. I think it's a really powerful message, particularly again in something like a university where we're kind of supporting people from quite an area, an age where they're kind of really kind of developing into a career. What we need to think about, or how do we make sure that they don't sort of lose that momentum, or they don't end up going down a different path, or a path that could be better if they, like you said, it all comes back to that flourishing conversation, doesn't it, as well, which I think is really important. In terms of the what we talked about with the LGBT community, I think it's really interesting that you said that maybe they kind of know themselves a bit more. But we've also talked, we talked a bit off camera about the link with mental health as well, and neurodiversity. And I wonder, there is obviously a lot around, some people feel quite a lot, or they feel in different ways, and that kind of can sometimes feed into that mental health sort of element. But also, I guess that feeling, you've touched upon it a little bit throughout all of your kind of conversations, that quite easily you can feel like you're not enough, or that you're different, or there's something wrong with you. And how have you navigated that? It must have been really hard, especially as such a young boy, to kind of go through an experience not knowing who you were, not knowing what was going to happen. How have you kind of navigated and supported your mental health throughout your life?
Yeah, the honest question is that I'm still doing it now. And I think that's one of the misconceptions. Like when we look at people and we assume that they're so, my head's so tightly screwed on, and I know exactly what I'm doing, and because I've created this TV show, I know exactly the trajectory that I want to go in. But that's not the case at all. Like my mental health still has moments where it's really difficult, especially with the conversations that I end up having, and especially, again, just with my kind of lived experience in the Tourette's world, that the high rates of people wanting to kill themselves and actually attempting to. And so when I'm having those conversations with people and talking about those experiences, mental health does become really compromised. I think one of the things that I've tried to learn as best I can is being kind to yourself. And I think that dependent on your neurodivergence, I think one of the things that is across the board is we work because we never feel we're good enough, and we work ourselves into feeling so burnt out, or just so exhausted, or being ill. And it's about realizing that and stepping back before you get into that kind of bad groove. I'm currently right now funding a new TV series, and so I've been working 12 to 13 hours a day, and I know that I shouldn't be doing that. And why am I doing that? I'm doing it because I care, and I want to get this done as quickly as possible. Should I be doing that? No, because once I've done a week of that, I'm then going to be less productive the next week, and continuously. So just checking in with yourself, and honestly, like being kind to yourself, but more than being kind to yourself, actually loving yourself. And I think that if you ask yourself the question, if you look at yourself in the mirror and say, do I love myself? And the answer to that is not yes in abundance, then getting some therapy and finding whatever therapy works for you, whether it's talking to a person or other therapeutic means, in order to really find yourself and check in with yourself. Because, again, a lot of the conversations I have from people is them saying, well, I need this, I need that, I need that. And ultimately our biggest champion is ourselves. And until we love ourselves, we can't love anything or anyone else. And so being proud of who we are with all of our flaws and all of our perfections and all of these things, and knowing that we are doing the best job we can do, but being kind to ourselves, it is the best possible thing. I meditate every morning. And again, like my ADHD brain hates the idea of sitting down for 5 minutes. So it's never based on a timer. The second you tell me I've got to do something for this amount of time, done, goodbye, don't tell me what to do. So I'll sit down for however long or little I want. And I'll do this humming thing where I'll just let out a hum, and that moves around this area, which is like vibrations, so it wakes you up. There's loads of little exercises you can do in the morning where you just move your body around, and there's something that will work for you. It could be Wim Hof. Like, there's something that will work for you, but don't get too lost in your neurodivergence. Like, have it be your best supporter and have it be your champion on the side to help propel you, but understand the negatives and the challenges that can come from it, and treat it like it's a friend, and be good to it, be kind to it, because that's how you'll get the most out of it.
Amazing. That's really, I think, really lovely. I'm going to just, before I get to my last question, just open it up again to the floor, as if anyone's got a question that they would like to ask, please put it in the chat or raise your hand. I think there's obviously been a couple of comments already with people finding it really inspiring what you've been saying. So just let people have a moment if they want it. And then I'm going to ask a final question. No one's coming forward just yet, so I'm going to ask it and see if people come forward while I asked it. So, what if you could go back and give like a piece of advice to your younger self, thinking in terms of, like, we obviously have a lot of students at the university. We've also got a lot of parents and carers that talk about trying to navigate the space with their own young children or young people coming forward. What one piece of advice would you give to your younger self now, knowing everything you've been through? And then the same question, but what advice would you give to someone that maybe is just about to start on a journey to get a diagnosis? They might be slightly different, they might be the same.
I'd say that if I was to talk to my younger self, it would just simply be, you are good enough. Because when we're younger, we always feel like we're not good enough. And so it would just simply be, you are good enough. And if it was someone who is navigating their diagnosis now, it would be very similar to the advice I just gave about mental health, because I think that it's one thing to go out there and get a diagnosis. Let's use ADHD as an example, right? I think there's a lot of people who probably go out there and I think I've got ADHD. They go out, they get the diagnosis, they pop a pill, and they think, yay, ADHD, great, cool, I can get on with it now. But it's not like that at all. Yes, okay, if you want to go down the medication route, fantastic, it works for you, brilliant. But it's all the other things you should be doing around that. It's lifestyle. What are you eating? Are you doing exercise? Are you checking in with yourself? Are you journaling? Are you meditating? How many hours are you working? Are you happy with your job? Like, it's all these things. And you can get a diagnosis of something and still be just as unhappy as you were before, because you've not looked at all these other things. And I think that a lot of people might look at neurodivergence as this, right, I've got my diagnosis, I'm taking the medication, that's it. But it's definitely not that. And I thought that, when I first got my diagnosis, because I decided to go down the medication route, I thought I was one of those people. I thought, great, I'll take the meds and then it's going to be perfect. But then it was the meds which allowed me to realise that my lifestyle needed to change. Then I took that route. And again, even now, when certain life moments come in, my whole schedule changes around. So, for example, with all this stuff coming out right now around Tourette, my phone has been going off the hook constantly. All the radio stations want to talk, the TV stations, all the prints, all the nationals, they won't comment because I'm the global ambassador within all these charities. And so me going to the gym hasn't happened. Me getting through work that I desperately needed to do, like proposals, hasn't happened. And then you start to beat yourself up. So know that life is going to constantly do this, but just work with yourself and don't be your own worst enemy. Don't bully yourself, and know that life's never going to be perfect, but you just got to roll with it.
Perfect. I mean, what an inspiring way to end. Nothing's come through question wise, so I'm gonna sort of say for your last few
Oh,
minutes.
there's a little one.
Oh,
There's a little one there. There's a
oh,
little one
there
there.
is.
There we
Amazing.
go.
There's a hand. Sarah, come on.
There we go. Support. So, what type of support or therapy have you found the most useful in relation to helping you understand and managing your neurodiversity? I'm trying to think, because a lot of it is kind of like self-epiphanies that take place just when you reach this kind of milestone or moment. But I think, honestly speaking, it's when I talk to other people who are neurodivergent, because with what I do, I take my own experiences and I talk about them. And I'm kind of here, in a way, performing based on what has gone on in my life and trying to share my wisdom and knowledge. But when I'm doing that, I'm not internalizing. I'm talking, sharing my wisdom in the hopes that other people can internalize that energy and go on that journey having learned something, and become inspired by that to be better to themselves. So for me, it's when exactly the opposite is happening. When I'm having a conversation with someone else who's neurodivergent and hearing about their lives, or just seeing someone who's neurodivergent who's like prospering and doing such a good job, or watching someone who is a part of charities giving themselves towards something because they care so deeply about it. I think for me, when it comes to that kind of internal therapeutic loving myself more, it's in those moments. I think that's one side of it. But the other side is certainly meditation has helped me so much. If I get up and I'm flustered and I sit down and I meditate for 1 minute, 10 minutes, doesn't matter how long I decide to do it because I'm in control of it, then I just, after that, find myself so much more at ease. And if something was irking me, and again, if we use the ADHD world, RSD, so rejection sensitivity dysphoria, like, someone will say something minor to us, but for us, it's the biggest deal in the world. You've just kicked my child in the face. That's how, that's not actually happened, but that's what it feels like. And so being able to take that time to say, right, I'm feeling triggered. I'm going to hit this button and do that thing that brings me from super trigger. I'm about to do or say something or do something that's going to be bad afterwards, upset someone from something I've just said, to bringing it down to, okay, I'm calm again. Gosh, I can't believe I was thinking of saying that thing now that I'm calm. And knowing those moments, so bring yourself back, not sending that email because you've been so flustered and then regretting it after the 30 seconds of being able to recall it back as gone. Little things like that. I think a lot of trial and error. So I've given a couple of examples, again, talking to yourself in the mirror. Literally look at yourself in the mirror, talk to yourself and tell yourself that you love yourself, and big yourself up. And it might sound a little bit odd, but it really helps from a charisma standpoint, from a confidence standpoint, from a self-love standpoint. It's an amazing thing to do. And just being unapologetically yourself as well. If you can really come to terms with who you are as a person and feel no guilt, the struggles and the good parts, then you're going to get through life being a hell of a lot more happy.
Thank you.
No problem. Great question.
Great question. I can see a few people typing. Here we go.
Have I come across cases of fibromyalgia? If I pronounced that correctly, I mean, that would probably be the answer. No, I haven't. I've heard of, and I think in my kind of content I've done across social media and going through the feed, there have been instances where this has come up and I've looked into it a little bit more, but I have to say I'm a little bit new towards this exact condition. I've not done a deep dive by any means, and I think that goes back to what I said before about being a part of the community and kind of educating ourselves on what else is out there. So my learning from you just asking that question now would be to go away after this and look at exactly what it is and see what the similarities are within the other roster of neurodivergent conditions, and to see what kind of assistance or help or groups are out there, so that if I'm asked that question in the future, I can say, oh, actually, I would recommend that you go here or talk to this or follow this person on Instagram in order to be able to get that sense of community through the content and awareness building they're doing.
Amazing. We're pretty much at the time for an hour, and I know you've been talking non-stop, but I just wanted to finish off, is there anything that you would really like to leave us with that you want people to understand and appreciate about Tourette's, maybe more so than ADHD, because like you said, it's less known, that you want people to go away with and go, I've got that understanding about this now, just to kind of leave people with that final message?
Yeah, I'll say two things in that case. So the first thing I'll say is, when it comes to Tourette's and everything that's going on in the media right now, I think even internally within the neurodivergent community, that not everyone is educated on what's happening. If someone has coprolalia and they say things that are intrusive thoughts, it's not at all an indication of the values that they actually hold. So if someone says a certain word, it's not because their parent has taught them that word and it's freely said within the household. It's not because they have a particular belief of the word they've just said. So if they say something to a certain person, they don't believe that about that person. So coprolalia is not at all based around the values that a person holds and that they believe. It's saying the most inappropriate thing at that time based on intrusive thoughts. And I think that if we see people saying the opposite, we need to steer them in the right direction, because that's a very dangerous narrative to be having, especially when it comes into things that could be considered, racist or homophobic or whatever it might be. We need to really be alert in the reality of what coprolalia is within Tourette's. And I think that the second thing that I would say more on a broad level is, as you watch this, if there's one thing that you've been thinking of doing but you've not quite found the confidence to do it yet, go out there and just do it. Bite the bullet, go for it, take that leap. Because if you push yourself out of your comfort zone, and you should do that twice a day, every single day, then the means of which and lengths of which you can go to achieve exactly what you want to are unstoppable. But you've got to start somewhere. So take this talk today as that little push of inspiration, whereas you'd hold yourself back from doing that thing that you've been meaning to do for a while. Just go out, do it, and take on the world, because you are good enough and you can sure as hell do it.
Oh, amazing. So inspiring. This has been such a great chat, and I feel like it's inspired me, so hopefully it's inspired everyone else as well. I cannot thank you enough. I'm sure the thanks will be coming through in the chat, as we can see. It's been really, really lovely to speak to you, Aidy. Thank you for everyone for attending, and apologies again that the time shift and the complications at the beginning, but hopefully it was worth it. Yeah. We will obviously, this has been recorded and the recording will be shared as well, so people, please feel free to share with other people in your teams or outside that you think that would find this useful. So yeah, again, thank you so much, Aidy. It really has been lovely to speak to you, and like I said, very, very inspiring personally as well.
Well, thank you for organising it, because it wouldn't happen without you. And thank you everyone coming, because, unless we have an audience who will listen to these things, that they aren't going to do anything. So thank you all.